The Addiction is Abel Ferrera's follow-up to Bad Lieutenant. A philosophy student is bitten by a vampire and finds herself living the life of an addict. The film was praised for its portrayal of good and evil and drug addiction. It stars Lili Taylor and Christopher Walken. Howdy folks! Welcome back to Garage Vampire-thon, where every day for the month of October we revisit a vampire movie. Today we're talking about The Addiction. In my introduction, I said this feels like a movie about addiction. That might sound familiar to some. That's right, we reviewed Martin on this channel, and Martin was very much a movie about addiction as well. If you guys remember in my Martin review, I talked about how just the location itself feels like a location where you would encounter a lot of drug addiction. And while this has a different location to it, it still feels like the same thing. Martin took place in this old, rundown steel mill town that doesn't have much going for it, a lot of drug addiction there. But here it's this very urban city with a lot of poverty, gangs, and stuff like that. So you feel like there's addiction going on there as well. However, I will say that this movie lacks the subtlety of Martin. Martin was a very subtle movie, and it was a very effective movie, and here I feel like it's a lot more in your face. That's not to say that it's necessarily bad for that. One thing that's definitely more in your face is Lili Taylor's performance when compared to the performance of John Amplas in Martin. And she gives a really good performance. You really feel like this woman is addicted to drinking blood. She's like always curled up in a fetal position whenever she doesn't have the blood. She's all jittery and shit. She basically carries this movie for me. I was not a fan of this movie, to be quite honest. It's a very messy movie, and I kind of feel the same way about most of Abel Ferrera's movies. One that he's constantly praised for is Bad Lieutenant, which I never understood Bad Lieutenant, to be quite honest. I watched it. I remember I kept hearing about Bad Lieutenant. I was like, I gotta watch this movie. And then my friend passed me the DVD, and he was like, I know you're not gonna like this movie. And I was like, what do you mean? It looks awesome. And I watched it, and I didn't like it. I think Abel Ferrera is so obsessed with being a provocateur that parades himself as an artist that he sometimes misses the mark on stuff like themes and what the movie is trying to say and what the greater story is. I thought Bad Lieutenant kind of felt more like satanic panic counterculture, because you have this whole plot where a guy who's like addicted to drugs and he's like the worst person ever, and he has to investigate the raping and murder of a nun. It feels like more caught up in it's like, oh, let's just shock, than it actually says anything, in my opinion anyway. And I know I'm in the minority with that. A lot of people love Bad Lieutenant, and I feel like this falls into the same category. It's just like, you have a good premise, but then you couldn't help but just be a provocateur. And not only that, but this movie is quite full of itself. It's very a pretentious movie. And I don't really say that often with movies, because I try to understand movies. But this is just, the messaging is all over the place. Because not only is it trying to be an allegory for drug addiction, it's also trying to say a lot about what's good and what's bad. What is the nature of sin? What is sin? A lot of philosophy jibber-jabber. Kierkegaard says this, Dante says that, Burroughs hit Nietzsche with a baseball bat, just spitting out quotes that I feel like Abel Ferrera kind of just read on a Wikipedia page or something like that. And a lot of people praise it for its deep philosophical themes, because he throws out names like Kierkegaard and Dante and Nietzsche, but just spitting out quotes from famous philosophers doesn't make you a philosopher. It makes you a parrot, in my opinion. I wish that he took his knowledge of Kierkegaard and Nietzsche and all those guys and found a clever way to illustrate it, rather than have his characters just spout out philosophy. And I get it, the protagonist in this movie is a philosophy student. She specializes in that. But there's some characters that shouldn't know philosophy, yet they spout philosophical lines. The movie, like I said, tries to deal with the theme of what's good and bad, what's sin and what isn't sin. The movie opens and your protagonist is attending a philosophy class where they talk about Nazi concentration camps and genocides and stuff like that. And she says, why do people do such atrocious things? And then later on in the movie, a character says, how are we any different if we're holding a gun to someone's head? And to me, like, maybe I'm just too oblivious to shit, but I'm like, doing a genocide is a lot worse than killing one person. Killing 1,000,000 people is a lot worse than killing one person. This movie is constantly trying to make you think outside the box, trying to be morally gray, but it's just so conflicted. The Nazi imagery was problematic to me. Not that I was offended. Abel Ferrera went for a swing and he totally missed. But just the Nazi imagery that he uses repeatedly in the movie conflicts with what the movie is trying to say. The character says, we're not sinners because we sin because we're sinners. And that's a good allegory for drug addiction because we are genetically predisposed to be addicts. It's kind of shown, like I studied pharmacy, there is a genetic component to becoming an addict. And I was kind of impressed with the movie for acknowledging that, especially a movie from the 90s where the war on drugs was still very present. It still is very present, but it's slowly becoming less present. And the whole thing kind of just inadvertently feels like he's trying to justify the Holocaust, which isn't what he's trying to do. I get what he is trying to do, but it just doesn't work. It kind of is jarring. And it goes back to Ferrera's inherent feeling of being a provocateur, where he said, I want to show this very disturbing imagery, but he thought of showing the disturbing imagery rather than think, why should I show this disturbing imagery? And then there's other moments in here where I feel like they come out of nowhere. There's no point to it. It doesn't really feed into the narrative of drug addiction. Neither does it feed into the narrative of good versus evil. The huge orgy scene where everyone's getting murdered doesn't really feel like something addicts would do. They wouldn't just go into a room and stab everyone with a needle. Like, there are people like that out there, but it's not like, it doesn't fit your allegory for drug addiction. Also, warning if you are considering watching this movie, Christopher Walken gets second billing in here. He's barely in the movie. It's more of an extended cameo. But then that feels like a moment too where it's like this guy is just spouting out his philosophy on how to recover from drug addiction. It tries to be deep, but it's like at the same time it's like this person is an addict. Like, you're not just gonna like cruise your way and smooth talk her out of drugs. It feels really weird and unfocused and sometimes a little dim-witted. I totally didn't get this movie. If there's one thing that kept me in tune with the movie, it's its setting and the main protagonist's performance. She does a really good job, Lili Taylor. Other than that, I just think this is a very messy movie, and especially after watching Martin, which is a movie that deals with drug addiction, that does it very tastefully and very effectively. This was borderline tasteless, and it wasn't very effective. The performance was effective, and she helped carry that theme of drug addiction. But as far as what the movie was trying to say, there's just way too much philosophical jibber-jabber, way too much quoting. It's easy to quote philosophers. It feels like Abel Ferrera trying to brag that he's smart. It's weird too because I was wondering what has Abel Ferrera been up to, because I know he made that Gangs of New York movie. Kings of New York, not Gangs of New York. He made Kings of New York, Bad Lieutenant, this movie, and I don't know any other Abel Ferrera movies. And I went through his filmography, and it was just a ton of 5s on IMDb. 5s and 4s, and sometimes the occasional low 6. But other than that, he hasn't been up to much. And I think it might be a bit of a case that his style is a bit outdated. It kind of seemed cool in the 90s to spout out your philosophical beliefs, but like at this point it just feels dated and lazy. I don't know. I just think that he could have illustrated the points filmically instead of having characters spout philosophical lines, and then you have conflicting imagery that goes against what you're trying to say. It makes for a very confusing watch. I don't get what he was trying to do with this movie. Yeah, I really didn't enjoy this movie, unfortunately. But guys, if you feel like I'm talking out of my ass and I'm just stupid, comment below what are your thoughts on the meaning of this movie. Maybe I didn't get it. Maybe you understand it better than I do. Comment below and let me know, and I'll see you guys around for more Vampire-thon.